All right, let's get right into it. We're going way back, like 400 years, to talk about a company so powerful, it basically rewrote the rules of the entire global economy. I mean, this thing became the richest corporation in all of human history. This is the wild story of the Dutch East India Company.
I mean, seriously? Could you imagine a company today waging its own wars, negotiating treaties with countries, minting its own money? It sounds like something from a movie, right? But this was absolutely real. This was the unbelievable power of the company they called the VOC.
So, how does a company even get that powerful? Well, our story kicks off with a few classic ingredients: money, a ton of power, and a desperate, desperate race for something that was, at the time, more valuable than gold: spices.
Okay, so here's the setup. It's the late 1500s, and the Dutch are in this huge fight for independence from Spain. And Spain, which was basically teamed up with Portugal at the time, decides to hit the Dutch where it hurts. They cut them off from the super lucrative spice trade. For the Dutch merchants, this was a disaster. So facing total ruin, they really had only one choice. They had to take this insane gamble and find their own way to the Spice Islands.
And let me tell you, these first trips were no joke. They were incredibly dangerous. You had sailors dealing with battles against the Portuguese, hostile locals, not to mention all kinds of deadly diseases. I mean, the very first expedition lost half its crew. But the few who did make it back proved something huge. They proved a direct route was possible. And the potential profit, oh, it was just astronomical.
Just try to wrap your head around this number. One single successful voyage in 1598 brought back a 400% profit. 400%. When you've got that kind of money just waiting to be made, well, let's just say people are willing to risk pretty much anything.
But here's the big problem, right? The risk was still just massive. If you're an investor and you back one fleet, and that fleet sinks, you're bankrupt. Done. The Dutch realized they needed a whole new way of doing business if they were going to manage this kind of risk and really dominate the trade.
And the solution they came up with? It was absolutely revolutionary. I mean, this is an idea that literally shapes our entire world today. Instead of having one rich person fund one super risky voyage, they started pulling their money together. You spread the investment across a bunch of different ships, so if one sinks, it's not a total catastrophe. And if that sounds familiar, it should. This is basically the invention of the modern stock market, spreading the risk to chase those huge rewards.
So the Dutch saw their rivals, the English, creating their own East India Company, and the Dutch government was like, nope, we can't have that. They basically forced all their competing merchants to team up. And so in 1602, that's exactly what happened. They formed the United East Indies Company, or as we know it, the VOC. And believe me, this was a total game changer.
And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some other trading group. The VOC is widely considered the world's first true multinational corporation. Because it had permanent capital from all those shareholders, it could think long term. It could build a global empire of trade. It created the very blueprint for the huge global companies we see all around us today. Now, to make sure this empire was secure, the Dutch government gave the VOC powers that are, well, they're almost hard to believe. It could literally wage war. It could negotiate treaties like it was a country. It could imprison and even execute people. It minted its own coins and established its own colonies. The line between being a company and being a state wasn't just blurred, it was totally gone. So, armed with this insane amount of power, the VOC wasn't just about trading anymore. Nope. It set out to build an actual empire. The goal was simple: conquer and monopolize the most valuable trade on the entire planet. And their number one rival in all of this was the English East India Company. You had both of these giants scrambling to set up trading posts and forts all over the Spice Islands. But there was a key difference. While the English were there to compete, the VOC had a much more ruthless goal in mind: a complete, total, iron-fisted monopoly. Yeah. And this rivalry, it got ugly and it got violent. In 1623, on a little island called Ombon, VOC officials accused a bunch of English traders of plotting against them, so they tortured and then executed 10 of them. This brutal event, which became known as the Ombon Massacre, created a massive diplomatic crisis and was a huge reason why the First Anglo-Dutch War kicked off years later. But you know,
The real genius of the VOC was its business model. It was brilliant. They didn't just sail stuff from Europe to Asia and back. No, no. They built this incredibly complex and profitable trading network within Asia itself. So, they'd take silver from Japan to buy silk and cotton in India, then trade that stuff for spices somewhere else, and then ship the super valuable spices back to Europe for insane profits. It was like a self-funding money machine.
So you take that brilliant business model and you combine it with all that quasi-governmental power, and what you get is an economic juggernaut. I mean, the sheer scale of this company at its absolute peak, it's just mind-boggling. Let me give you some numbers.
Okay, get this. By 1669, the VOC had 50,000 employees around the world. To put that into perspective for you, that's a bigger workforce than many countries in Europe could even raise for their entire army.
It commanded a massive private fleet. We're talking over 150 merchant ships, all linking together its global web of trading posts. And of course, to protect all those merchant ships, it had its own private navy of 40 warships. A private navy ready to enforce its monopoly by any means necessary. And the results of all this power, all this trade, the payoff? An absolutely incredible annual dividend of 40% for its investors. 40%! The VOC wasn't just successful. At this point, it was, without a doubt, the wealthiest and most powerful private company the world had ever seen. Period.
But you know how these stories go. No empire lasts forever. And by the time we get to the 18th century, this corporate titan, this company that seemed totally invincible, was starting to crack. And its decline was really a story of death by 1,000 cuts. From the inside, you had massive corruption and just terrible mismanagement. A really horrific massacre of Chinese residents in its main headquarters in 1740 absolutely destroyed its reputation. And then from the outside, the pressures were mounting. Competition from England was getting more intense, the spice trade itself just wasn't as profitable anymore, and people in Europe were starting to want new things like tea and sugar.
But the final nail in the coffin, the fatal blow, came during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War. By this point, Britain was the top dog on the seas, and its Royal Navy just systematically dismantled the VOC's fleet. Their ships were captured, their trading posts were taken over, and the company's finances were completely and utterly shattered. There was no coming back from that.
After that, it was pretty much over. The VOC kind of limped along for a few more years, but it was just a shadow of its former self. Then, on March 1st, 1796, the company was formally dissolved. All its remaining assets were just taken over by the Dutch government. The nearly 200-year reign of the world's first megacorporation had finally come to an end.
So the VOC pioneered all these ideas that define our economy today, right? Publicly traded companies, multinational supply chains, the incredible influence that corporations can have on world politics. The company itself might be long gone, but you could say its DNA is kind of all around us. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? The VOC's gone, but have its ideas about corporate power ever really disappeared?